26-year-old Riley Thompson, a young black single mother, boarded the late-night flight with her 8-month-old daughter, Nova, already exhausted. She had spent the last 2 days traveling between states after losing her job and desperately trying to reach her aunt's home, the only place left where she could stay. Nova was restless, crying from hunger and fatigue, and Riley's hands shook as she rocked her gently. Passengers sighed, rolled their eyes, or turned up their headphones. Riley apologized to everyone around her, knowing the judgment that came with traveling alone with a baby. Her seat was at the very back, right beside a man in a dark gray suit who looked as if he belonged on the cover of a business magazine. Sharp jawline, calm posture, expensive watch. Riley said a quick, embarrassed sorry as she tried to settle down. But the man, Adrian Hale, a 35-year-old millionaire CEO known publicly for being cold and serious, simply nodded and moved his briefcase to give her more room. Nova whimpered again, tiny fists clenching. Riley whispered, "Please, baby, not now." Her voice cracked. She hadn't eaten all day. She hadn't slept in nearly 2. Without a word, Adrian pressed the flight attendant button. "Warm water, please," he said. When it arrived, he passed it to Riley to mix the formula. "You look like you could use a minute," he murmured. Riley blinked in surprise. Kindness wasn't something she was used to. As the plane took off, Nova finally fell asleep on her mother's chest. Riley kept dozing off, jerking awake, afraid she'd bother the stranger beside her. "Go ahead," Adrian said gently. "Get some rest." And for the first time in months, she did. Her head slowly drifted onto his shoulder. Adrian froze for a second, not out of annoyance, but something else, something that surprised even him. He looked down at the young mother, her curls falling across her face, her baby sleeping peacefully. He realized no one had ever leaned on him this tenderly. No one had ever trusted him like this, not even unintentionally. Before we go deeper into this story, I want you to drop a comment telling me where you are watching from and what time is it. If you are new to this channel, hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell. Riley Thompson's life had unraveled in exactly 48 hours. 2 days ago, she'd been a medical billing specialist at a mid-sized healthcare company in Chicago, living in a modest but comfortable apartment, managing single motherhood with the kind of exhausted competence that came from having no other choice. Then her supervisor had called her into the conference room, never a good sign, and explained that budget cuts meant they were restructuring and her position was being eliminated. The words had felt like corporate euphemisms for, "We're firing you, but don't want to call it that." Riley had tried to negotiate, had explained that she was a single mother with an infant, had excellent performance reviews, had never missed a deadline. But the decision was final. They'd given her 2 weeks severance, barely enough to cover 1 month's rent, and walked her out that same afternoon. The panic had set in immediately. Riley's rent was $1,400 per month. Daycare for Nova cost another $1,200. Utilities, food, diapers, formula, her car payment, the expenses were relentless and unforgiving. Her savings account had exactly $847, the result of months of trying to build an emergency fund that never seemed to grow beyond 1,000 before some crisis depleted it again. She'd spent that first night applying to every remote medical billing job she could find, desperation making her less selective than she should have been. But the responses were either automated rejections or silence. The few interviews she'd managed to schedule couldn't happen fast enough. They wanted her to start immediately, but their hiring processes took weeks. By the second day, Riley had accepted a terrible reality. She couldn't afford to stay in Chicago, not even for 1 more month. Her lease required 30 days' notice, which meant she'd owe rent she couldn't pay. Daycare wouldn't let Nova attend without payment. The careful structure of her life was collapsing faster than she could prop it up. That's when she'd called her Aunt Denise in Atlanta, her mother's sister, the only family member who'd consistently shown up for Riley over the years. Denise had recently retired from teaching and lived alone in a 3-bedroom house. "Come stay with me," Denise had said without hesitation. "You and that baby need family right now. We'll figure everything out together." Riley had cried with relief and shame in equal measure. She was 26 years old, had worked since she was 16, had put herself through community college while pregnant and alone, had built what she'd thought was a stable life. And now she was running home to family like a teenager who'd failed at adulting. But pride didn't pay bills or feed babies. So Riley had packed everything she and Nova owned into 2 suitcases and a diaper bag, terminated her lease early and forfeited her security deposit, sold her car to a dealership for far less than it was worth, and bought the cheapest plane ticket she could find, a late-night flight with a connection that would get her to Atlanta by morning. The first flight had been brutal. Nova had cried during takeoff, the pressure hurting her ears, despite Riley trying everything to soothe her. Passengers had glared. One woman had made pointed comments about people who bring babies on planes when they clearly can't handle them. Riley had apologized repeatedly, her face burning with humiliation as she'd bounced Nova and whispered desperate pleas for her to please calm down. By the time they'd landed for their connection, Riley was shaking with exhaustion. She hadn't eaten since yesterday morning, couldn't afford airport food when she had exactly $73 to her name, until her severance check cleared in 5 business days. She'd fed Nova, changed her, walked her around the terminal trying to tire her out for the second flight. Now, boarding this final leg to Atlanta, Riley felt like she might collapse. Her arms ached from carrying Nova for hours, her head pounded from dehydration and stress, and Nova, picking up on her mother's tension, was fussy again, not screaming but whimpering in that way that promised screaming was coming soon. Their seats were in the very last row, 32E and 32F. Riley had checked in late and gotten the worst seats on the plane, cramped, near the bathroom, no recline. She'd approached her row with dread, seeing the man already seated in 32D, clearly wealthy, clearly important, clearly someone who'd be annoyed by a crying baby invading his space. "I'm so sorry," Riley had said immediately as she'd tried to maneuver into her seat while holding Nova and the overstuffed diaper bag. "I know the baby might cry. I'll do everything I can to keep her quiet." The man, Adrian, though she didn't know his name yet, had looked up from his phone. Riley had braced for irritation or judgment. Instead, he'd simply nodded and moved his expensive leather briefcase from under the seat in front of him to the overhead bin, creating more floor space for her things. "No apology necessary," he'd said quietly. "Babies cry. It's what they do." The kindness in his voice had almost undone Riley. She'd blinked back tears as she'd settled into her seat, Nova squirming in her lap, already beginning to fuss louder. As the plane filled and the flight attendants began their safety demonstration, Nova's fussing escalated to crying. Riley tried the pacifier. Nova spit it out. Tried rocking, Nova arched her back and wailed louder. Tried offering a bottle, Nova turned her head away. "I'm sorry," Riley whispered again to the man beside her, though he'd put in earbuds and was staring at his phone. Maybe he was ignoring them. Maybe he was just being polite by pretending not to notice. Then, without looking at her, Adrian pressed the flight attendant call button above his seat. When the attendant arrived, he said calmly, "Warm water, please." The attendant glanced at Riley and Nova. "For the baby's formula?" "Yes," Adrian confirmed. Riley stared at him. "You didn't have to. Formula mixes better with warm water," Adrian said, still not quite looking at her but speaking gently. "And you look like you could use a minute. Let me help with this one small thing." When the attendant returned with warm water, Adrian took it and handed it to Riley with the same calm efficiency he probably used in business meetings. Riley's hands were shaking as she mixed Nova's formula, gratitude and exhaustion making her emotional. "Thank you," she whispered. "You're welcome," Adrian replied. Then, removing one earbud, "You look exhausted, like you've been traveling for a while." 2 days, Riley admitted, focusing on getting the formula to the right temperature. "Lost my job, lost my apartment, moving to stay with family in Atlanta. It's been a lot." "I'm sorry," Adrian said, and he sounded like he meant it. "That's an incredible amount of stress to handle while caring for an infant alone." The simple acknowledgement of how hard this was made Riley's eyes sting with tears. Most people either judged her for her circumstances or offered useless platitudes. This stranger was doing neither, just seeing her struggle and naming it without judgment. Nova finally accepted the bottle, sucking hungrily, her cries subsiding to occasional hiccuping breaths. As the plane took off, she finished eating and her eyes began to droop. Riley held her against her chest, swaying slightly, praying she'd fall asleep and stay asleep. "Go ahead," Adrian said after 20 minutes of Riley obviously fighting her own exhaustion. "Get some rest. I'll keep an eye out." "I can't," Riley protested. "I might fall asleep on you or something. That would be so inappropriate." "You're exhausted," Adrian said practically. "If you don't rest, you won't be able to function when you land. And honestly, if you lean on me while sleeping, I really won't mind. I promise." Riley wanted to argue, wanted to maintain some dignity and boundaries, but exhaustion won. Her eyes drifted closed despite her best efforts to stay alert. Nova was sleeping peacefully against her chest. The plane's white noise was hypnotic, and this stranger beside her had been so kind, had helped without being asked, had made it clear he didn't mind her presence. Her head drifted sideways, coming to rest against something solid and warm. Adrian's shoulder. Riley's last conscious thought was that she should jerk awake and apologize, but sleep claimed her before she could. Adrian Hale felt the weight of Riley's head settle against his shoulder and went completely still. He'd told her it was okay, had meant it genuinely, but actually experiencing this moment of unexpected intimacy was affecting him in ways he hadn't anticipated. Adrian had built his real estate development empire through calculated risks, strategic thinking, and an almost legendary ability to stay emotionally detached from situations that didn't directly serve his goals. At 35, he was worth approximately $340 million, ran a company that employed over 2,000 people, and was frequently described in business publications as ruthlessly efficient and intimidatingly focused. What those publications didn't know, what almost no one knew, was that Adrian was profoundly lonely. His wealth had created barriers between him and genuine human connection. People wanted things from him: investments, donations, business partnerships, social access. Even his romantic relationships felt transactional, women attracted to his status and wealth rather than to him as a person. He'd learned to protect himself by staying emotionally distant, by treating personal interactions with the same calculated detachment he used in business. It worked. It kept him from being used or hurt, but it also kept him isolated in ways he was only beginning to acknowledge. And now this young woman, this stranger who'd boarded the plane looking defeated and desperate, who'd apologized repeatedly for her crying baby, who clearly had nothing Adrian could possibly want or need, was leaning against him with complete unconscious trust. She wasn't performing or trying to impress him. She wasn't even aware of him. She was just exhausted and had accepted his offer of kindness at face value. The baby Nova, he'd heard Riley call her, was sleeping peacefully between them, her tiny hand clutching her mother's shirt. Mother and child both finally resting, after what had clearly been a brutal couple of days. Adrian looked down at them and felt something crack open in his chest, some wall he'd built years ago to protect himself from feeling too much, because this moment wasn't transactional or calculated. Riley hadn't leaned on him because he was wealthy or powerful. She'd leaned on him because she was tired and he'd offered basic human kindness. When was the last time someone had trusted him like this? When had anyone ever needed him for something as simple as a shoulder to rest on? Adrian made a decision in that moment. He didn't fully understand why, couldn't articulate the logic in business terms. He just knew that this woman and her baby deserved better than the circumstances they were clearly facing, and he had resources to help. Not because doing so would benefit him professionally, but because it felt like the right thing to do, the human thing to do. He pressed the flight attendant call button again. When the attendant arrived, he kept his voice low so as not to wake Riley. "Could you bring me 2 items? A blanket and whatever warm food you have available? And if you have any small stuffed toys or gifts for children, I'd appreciate one of those as well." The attendant, recognizing Adrian from his frequent first-class travels, he was flying economy tonight only because he'd booked last minute, and first class was sold out, nodded with understanding. "Of course, Mr. Hale. Give me just a few minutes." She returned with a soft airline blanket, a hot meal from first-class chicken, rice, vegetables far better than the typical economy fare, and a small stuffed bunny that she explained was normally given to first-class children. Adrian thanked her and carefully draped the blanket over Riley and Nova, ensuring the baby stayed warm. He positioned the meal on Riley's tray table so it would be there when she woke, and he placed the stuffed bunny beside Nova, thinking about how the baby probably had very few toys if Riley had packed her entire life into 2 suitcases. Then Adrian settled in for the 3-hour flight, determined not to move and risk waking Riley. His shoulder would be stiff by the time they landed. His neck would probably ache. But this woman needed rest more than he needed comfort. So he stayed perfectly still, occasionally glancing down at the sleeping mother and baby, and thinking about how strange and significant this night felt. Like something was shifting in his carefully controlled life. Like he was being offered a chance at something genuine and meaningful if he had the courage to reach for it. 2.5 hours into the flight, Riley began to stir. Her head shifted against Adrian's shoulder, and he heard her breath catch as consciousness returned. Then she jerked fully awake, sitting up abruptly, her eyes wide with mortification. "Oh my God," Riley breathed, her cheeks flushing. "I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to fall asleep on you. That was so inappropriate. I should have." She stopped mid-sentence, her eyes landing on the blanket that had been covering her, then the food on her tray table, then the small stuffed bunny tucked beside Nova. She looked at Adrian, confusion and something like wonder in her expression. Did you do all this?" Adrian smiled, genuinely smiled for the first time in longer than he could remember. "You were tired. I wanted you both to be comfortable. The food is probably still warm if you're hungry." "But why?" Riley asked, tears forming in her eyes. "You don't know me. I'm just a stranger with a crying baby who fell asleep on you. Why would you—" "Because you needed help and I could provide it," Adrian said simply. "It's really that straightforward, Riley." She blinked. "You know my name? You told me earlier, when you mentioned losing your job and moving to Atlanta. Riley Thompson, right?" The fact that he'd remembered, that he'd been listening when she'd been too exhausted and stressed to even register their conversation properly, made fresh tears spill down Riley's cheeks. "I haven't eaten since yesterday morning," Riley admitted, looking at the food. "I couldn't afford airport food. I've been running on empty for 2 days. And you gave me food and let me sleep and gave my daughter a toy and covered us with a blanket. I don't even know your name and you've been kinder to me than anyone has been in months." "Adrian," he said. "Adrian Hale. And Riley, what you're describing is just basic human decency. The fact that it feels exceptional to you tells me you've been dealing with people who haven't been decent to you." "No, that's one way to put it," Riley said with a hollow laugh. She looked at the food again. "Can I really eat this?" "Please," Adrian encouraged. "I had the attendant bring it from first class specifically for you." As Riley ate quickly at first, like someone who'd been genuinely hungry, then slower as her body adjusted to having food, she and Adrian talked. She told him more about losing her job, about the panic of realizing she couldn't afford to stay in Chicago, about swallowing her pride to ask her aunt for help. "I feel like such a failure," Riley admitted. "I'm 26 years old and I'm running home to family because I couldn't make it work on my own. I have a daughter depending on me, and I lost my job and my apartment and everything I'd built." "You're not a failure," Adrian said firmly. "You're someone dealing with an incredibly difficult situation. Riley, companies lay people off all the time for reasons that have nothing to do with employee performance. That doesn't reflect on your worth or capabilities. And accepting help from family when you need it isn't failure, it's wisdom." "Do you have family you can depend on?" Riley asked, then immediately backtracked. "Sorry, that's too personal. You don't have to answer that." "No, it's fine," Adrian said. "And honestly, no. My parents died in a car accident when I was 22. I was an only child. I've built a successful company, but I don't have close personal relationships. No family to depend on if things got difficult." "I'm sorry," Riley said sincerely. "That must be lonely." "It is." Adrian admitted an honesty he rarely allowed himself, let alone shared with strangers. "I have colleagues and business associates, people who work for me or want things from me. But genuine connection, that's been missing from my life for a long time. Which is why tonight has been unexpected. You letting me help, trusting me enough to fall asleep even though we're strangers, accepting kindness without suspicion or expectation of ulterior motives. It's reminded me what genuine human interaction feels like. Everyone. Riley studied him with those perceptive brown eyes. You're lonely. Yes, Adrian confirmed simply. Me too, Riley admitted. Even though I have Nova and I have my aunt who loves me, I've been so alone trying to manage everything by myself. Nova's father left the day I told him I was pregnant. My parents disowned me for keeping her. Friends drifted away when they realized single motherhood meant I couldn't go out or be spontaneous anymore. I've been surviving but not really living, you know? I do know, Adrian said. Though my loneliness looks different from yours, the feeling is the same. Being surrounded by people but genuinely connected to almost no one. The plane began its descent into Atlanta. Around them, passengers were gathering belongings, stretching, preparing to deplane. Riley carefully collected the blanket and folded it, her expression thoughtful. Adrian, she said quietly, thank you. Not just for the food and the blanket and the toy, but for seeing me, for treating me like a person who matters rather than an inconvenience. You have no idea how much I needed that tonight. You're welcome, Adrian said. Then, before he could second-guess himself, Riley, I know this might sound strange, but could I have your contact information? I'd like to help more if you're open to it. I own housing developments in Atlanta. One of the apartments is currently vacant, fully furnished, safe neighborhood, good schools nearby. You and Nova could stay there while you get back on your feet. No rent for the first 3 months, then reasonable rates after that if you decide to stay. Quote, Riley stared at him like he'd spoken a foreign language. You're offering me an apartment? A free apartment? We just met. You've known me for 3 hours. Why would you possibly? Because I can, Adrian said. Because I have resources that could make your situation significantly less stressful. Because helping you costs me almost nothing, but could change everything for you. Riley, I'm not offering this expecting anything in return. I'm offering because it's something I can do to make your life easier. People don't do things for nothing, Riley said, suspicion creeping into her voice despite herself. There's always an expectation, always something they want. I understand why you'd think that, Adrian said gently. Your experiences have taught you to be suspicious of help. But I promise you, I'm not expecting anything. This is just a straightforward offer. An empty apartment I own, available for you and Nova if you want it. You can say no. You can think about it and decide later. But please don't reject help, just because you've been taught that accepting it means owing someone. Riley was quiet for a long moment, clearly warring between desperate need and learned caution. Finally, can I call you? After I talk to my aunt, after I think about this, I'm not saying no, I'm just saying I need time to process. Of course, Adrian said. He pulled a business card from his wallet and wrote his personal cell number on the back. This is my office line on the front, my personal number on the back. Call either one, anytime. If you decide you want to see the apartment, I'll arrange it. If you decide it's not right for you, no hard feelings whatsoever. As the plane landed and taxied to the gate, Riley tucked Adrian's card carefully into her wallet. Nova was waking up, blinking sleepy eyes, reaching for the new stuffed bunny with delight. Bunny, Nova babbled one of her few words, clutching the toy against her chest. A nice man gave that to you, Riley told her daughter softly. A very kind man who helped Mama and you when we needed it. They deplaned together, walking through the jetway into the bright fluorescent lights of the Atlanta airport. Riley's aunt was supposed to be waiting at baggage claim. Adrian had no one waiting. He'd flown to Atlanta for a single day of meetings and was heading to a hotel before flying back to New York tomorrow. At the entrance to baggage claim, Riley paused. Thank you again, Adrian, for everything tonight. You reminded me that kind people still exist in the world. I really needed that reminder. Take care of yourself and Nova, Adrian said. And please, call me. Even if you decide against the apartment, I'd like to know you're both okay. Riley nodded, then impulsively reached out and squeezed his hand. You're a good person, Adrian Hale. Don't let the business world convince you otherwise. Then, she was moving into the baggage claim area, scanning for her aunt. Nova clutched against her hip and the bunny still gripped in her daughter's hand. Adrian watched her go, feeling that strange crack in his chest widen. This woman he'd known for 3 hours had affected him more profoundly than most people he'd known for years. The trust she'd shown falling asleep on his shoulder, the vulnerability she'd shared about her circumstances, the way she'd seen his loneliness and named it without judgment. He'd meant what he'd told her. He wanted to help, but he also realized with startling clarity that he wanted more than that. He wanted to know her, to understand who she was beyond just a struggling single mother in crisis, to explore this unexpected connection that had formed between strangers on a late-night flight. Adrian Hale had built an empire through strategic thinking and calculated decisions, but this felt like something beyond strategy, something genuine and unexpected and potentially transformative if he had the courage to pursue it. So he made another decision, not a business calculation, but a personal commitment. He would help Riley and Nova however they'd let him, not to impress or manipulate, but because helping them felt like the most meaningful thing he'd done in years. And maybe, if he was very fortunate, helping them would lead to something more, something real, something that filled the lonely spaces wealth had never been able to touch. Riley didn't call Adrian for 5 days. Those 5 days were spent settling into her Aunt Denise's warm, cluttered home in a quiet Atlanta suburb. Denise had converted her spare bedroom into a nursery of sorts, borrowing a crib from church friends and stocking it with second-hand baby items. She'd welcomed Riley and Nova with fierce hugs and absolutely no judgment about the circumstances that had brought them there. "Baby girl, you are not a failure," Denise had said firmly on that first night when Riley had broken down crying over tea in the kitchen while Nova slept. "You are a young woman who faced impossible circumstances with grace and strength. Your mama was wrong to turn her back on you for keeping that baby. You did the right thing, and I'm proud of you." Those words had helped. So had the stability of having a roof over their heads, regular meals, and someone who genuinely wanted to help rather than judge. But Riley couldn't shake the memory of Adrian's kindness on that flight, or the business card burning a hole in her wallet with its promise of an apartment she desperately needed but was terrified to accept. "Who is this man?" Denise had asked when Riley had finally confessed about Adrian's offer. "And why would some millionaire give you a free apartment?" "Riley, baby, that sounds too good to be true. Men like that always want something in return." "That's what I thought too," Riley admitted. "But Aunt Denise, he was so kind. He helped me without being asked, let me sleep on his shoulder for 3 hours without complaining, gave Nova a toy, made sure we had food, and when he offered the apartment, he made it clear he expects nothing in return. He even said I could say no, and there'd be no hard feelings. Men don't do things for nothing," Denise said skeptically, "especially not wealthy men. They're used to buying what they want, and baby, you're a beautiful young woman. He might think that apartment comes with certain expectations." "I don't think he's like that," Riley protested, though doubt crept in. Was she being naive? Was Adrian's kindness a manipulation tactic, a way to create obligation that he'd cash in later? On the 6th day, Riley finally gathered the courage to call the number Adrian had written on his business card. Her hands shook as she dialed, and she almost hung up 3 times before the call connected. "Adrian Hale," his voice came through, professional and slightly distracted. "Hi, this is Riley Thompson. From the flight last week? You gave me your card and said I could call about the apartment situation." The professional distance in Adrian's voice vanished immediately, replaced by genuine warmth. "Riley, I'm so glad you called. I've been hoping you would. How are you? How's Nova?" "We're okay," Riley said. "Staying with my aunt right now, which is good. She's been really supportive. But it's a small house and I know we can't stay here forever. I've been looking for jobs but haven't had much luck yet. And honestly, your apartment offer keeps running through my mind. I need to know, is it real? And if it is real, what exactly are you expecting in return?" "It's completely real," Adrian assured her. "And Riley, I'm expecting nothing in return. No romantic involvement, no personal favors, nothing inappropriate. Just you and Nova having a safe place to live while you get back on your feet. That's it." "Why?" Riley asked bluntly. You don't know me. We spent 3 hours on a plane together. Why would you offer something this valuable to a stranger? Adrian was quiet for a moment. Honestly, because I can. Because I have resources that could make your life significantly easier without costing me anything meaningful. I own over 40 residential properties in Atlanta, Riley. One of them sitting empty doesn't benefit anyone. But you living there, having stability while you rebuild your life that actually matters. That creates value beyond just monetary return. And you don't want anything from me? Riley pressed. Not even, I don't know, gratitude or attention, or, I want you to be safe and stable, Adrian interrupted gently. That's what I want, Riley. Nothing more complicated than that. Though I will admit I'd like to stay in touch. Not because I expect anything, but because I genuinely liked talking with you on that flight. You were real with me in ways people rarely are. I'd value your friendship if you're open to it. Friendship, Riley repeated, testing the word. Just friendship, Adrian confirmed. Riley, I promise you can trust me on this. Let me show you the apartment. No obligation, no pressure. If you see it and decide it's not right for you, or if you're uncomfortable with the arrangement for any reason, you can walk away. No harm, no hard feelings. Riley took a deep breath. Okay, I'd like to see it. When are you available? I'm in Atlanta this week, actually, Adrian said. Business meetings through Friday. Could you meet tomorrow afternoon? Say 2 o'clock. They arranged to meet at the apartment building, a renovated historic structure in the old Fourth Ward neighborhood, within walking distance of grocery stores, parks, and a library. Adrian texted her the address, and Riley spent the rest of that day researching both the building and the neighborhood. What she found surprised her. The building had excellent reviews from current tenants who praised the responsive management and safe, well-maintained common areas. The neighborhood was gentrifying, but not yet fully gentrified, a mix of long-time residents and young professionals, racially diverse, with good schools and community resources. This wasn't some sketchy building in a dangerous area where Adrian was dumping unwanted property. This was a desirable location where market-rate apartments went for $1,500, $2,000 per month, and he was offering it to her rent-free for 3 months. The next afternoon, Riley dressed Nova in her cutest outfit and spent extra time on her own appearance, wanting to look competent and professional rather than desperate. Denise had agreed to drive them to the address, insisting on meeting this Adrian person herself before Riley accepted any apartments from strange men. The building was even nicer in person than it had looked online. The brick facade had been beautifully restored, the lobby featured original hardwood floors and modern furnishings, and everything was impeccably clean. Adrian was waiting in the lobby, dressed casually in jeans and a button-down shirt, somehow looking both approachable and undeniably wealthy. Riley, he greeted her with a genuine smile. It's good to see you again. And Nova, he crouched down to baby level. You're even cuter than I remembered. Nova, clutching her stuffed bunny which hadn't left her side since the flight, gave Adrian a shy smile. Riley felt her heart do something complicated at the sight of this powerful businessman making himself baby accessible without any self-consciousness. This is my Aunt Denise, Riley said. She wanted to meet you before I accepted any apartment offers from men I met on planes. I don't blame her, Adrian said, straightening and offering his hand to Denise. Adrian Hale, I appreciate you looking out for Riley. She's lucky to have family who cares. Denise shook his hand, but her expression remained skeptical. Mr. Hale, I'll be direct. Why are you offering my niece a free apartment? And don't tell me it's just because you can. People with your kind of money don't stay wealthy by giving things away for nothing. You're right, Adrian agreed. But sometimes the return on investment isn't monetary. Riley reminded me on that flight what genuine human connection feels like. She was real with me without knowing who I was or what I could offer. That's rare in my world, Miss Johnson, and it mattered to me. Helping her now is partly gratitude for that moment of authenticity, and partly just wanting to use my resources to make someone's difficult situation easier. I don't need anything from Riley, I just want to help. Denise studied him for a long moment. And if she takes this apartment and then meets someone, starts dating, gets her life together, and doesn't need you anymore, you won't suddenly decide she owes you something? No, Adrian said firmly. This isn't a transaction with hidden terms. It's straightforward assistance with clear boundaries. Riley can date whoever she wants, live her life however she chooses. This apartment is hers as long as she needs it, with no strings attached. Show us the apartment, Denise said, still skeptical but slightly less hostile. The apartment on the 3rd floor was stunning. 1 bedroom with space for a crib, a full bathroom with modern fixtures, an open-plan living area, and kitchen with new appliances, hardwood floors throughout, large windows that let in natural light. It was furnished simply but adequately: a couch, a dining table with chairs, a bed frame and mattress, kitchen essentials, everything someone would need to live comfortably without spending money on furniture. Oh my God, Riley breathed, walking through the space with Nova on her hip. This is beautiful. Adrian, apartments like this rent for what? $1,800 a month? And you're offering it for free? For 3 months. Yes, Adrian confirmed. After that, if you want to stay and can afford it, we can discuss a reasonable rent. But Riley, 3 months should give you time to find employment and save some money without the pressure of immediate housing costs. Riley opened the bedroom closet, checked the bathroom fixtures, examined the kitchen appliances, all high quality, all clean and functional. She kept waiting for the catch, for the moment when Adrian would reveal what he really wanted. But he just stood back, letting her explore, occasionally answering questions but mostly giving her space to assess the situation. There's a daycare in the building, Adrian added. Ground floor, run by a woman named Carmen who's licensed and excellent. She has space for Nova if you're interested, and the rate is subsidized for building residents, about $600 a month for full-time care, which is half what you'd pay at most Atlanta daycares. Why are you doing all this? Riley asked again, tears threatening. Adrian, this is so much more than basic help. This is life-changing. I don't understand why you'd offer this to someone you barely know. Adrian met her eyes directly. Because the night we met, you fell asleep on my shoulder with complete unconscious trust. Because you shared your struggles without performing or trying to manipulate my sympathy. Because you're raising your daughter alone in circumstances that would break most people, and you're doing it with grace and strength. Riley, you deserve this help. You deserve stability and safety while you rebuild your life. Please let me provide it. Denise, who'd been silently observing this exchange, finally spoke. Riley, baby, I think his offer is genuine. I don't sense any ulterior motives. And honestly, this apartment is a blessing you can't afford to refuse. Take it. Get you and that baby settled. Find a good job. Build the life you deserve. Okay, Riley whispered. Yes, I'll take the apartment. Thank you, Adrian. Thank you so much. The move happened within a week. Adrian arranged for movers to help with Riley's minimal belongings, ensured the apartment had basic supplies, toilet paper, dish soap, laundry detergent, all the small things people forget when moving, and even stocked the refrigerator with essentials. He did all of this without fanfare or expectation of gratitude, just quiet efficiency that made Riley's transition as smooth as possible. Nova adapted to the new space immediately, delighting in having her own crib in their own apartment. Riley spent the first night after moving in just sitting on the couch with her daughter, hardly believing their good fortune. They had a home, a real home in a safe building in a good neighborhood, all because a stranger on a plane had chosen kindness. Adrian visited twice in the first month, both times brief check-ins to ensure everything was working properly, and Riley had everything she needed. He never stayed long, never pushed for personal interaction beyond friendly conversation, always respected boundaries. But Riley found herself looking forward to those visits, appreciating not just his generosity but his company. How's the job search going? Adrian asked during his second visit, sitting at her kitchen table while Nova played with blocks on the living room floor. Slow, Riley admitted. I've had a few interviews but nothing concrete yet. Everyone wants immediate starts but also extensive training periods, and the pay is often less than I was making before. It's frustrating. What kind of work are you looking for? Adrian asked. Medical billing, ideally. That's what I was doing before. But honestly, I'd take anything stable with decent pay and benefits at this point. Adrian was quiet for a moment, clearly thinking. Riley, I'm going to make another offer, and I want you to know you can absolutely say no without it affecting the apartment situation. Riley tensed. Here it came, the real expectation, the thing he'd been waiting to ask for. My company has an opening for an administrative coordinator, Adrian continued. It's entry level, but with room for growth. Pays $52,000 annually with full benefits, and the hours are flexible enough that you could do school pickup and handle childcare needs without stress. You'd be qualified based on your billing experience. The role involves data management, scheduling, coordinating between departments. Would you be interested in interviewing? Riley stared at him. You're offering me a job now? On top of the apartment? I'm offering you an interview, Adrian clarified. If you're interested and qualified, my HR department will handle the actual hiring process. But yes, Riley, I think you'd be good at this work, and my company needs someone reliable in that position. This isn't charity, it's recognizing that you have skills we need and offering you the opportunity to use them. What if people think I only got the job because of this? Riley gestured vaguely between them. Because you're helping me? No one at my company except my HR director knows about the apartment situation, Adrian said, and she won't disclose that to anyone. If you interview and get hired, people will know you as Riley Thompson, the administrative coordinator, not as anyone I'm helping. Riley thought about the job search frustrations, about the mounting anxiety of her severance running out, about the 3-month rent-free period that would end sooner than she wanted to think about. Yes, she said, I'd like to interview. Thank you for thinking of me. The interview happened 2 days later at Adrian's company headquarters, a sleek downtown office building that housed Hale Development Group's operations. Riley met with the HR director, an intimidating but fair woman named Patricia, who asked pointed questions about her experience and capabilities without any hint of special treatment. You have solid billing and administrative experience, Patricia said after 45 minutes of discussion. Your organizational skills are evident, and you present well professionally. I'm prepared to offer you the position at $52,000 annually with our standard benefits package, health insurance, dental, vision, 401k matching, and 15 days PTO. Does that interest you? Very much, Riley said, trying to keep her composure when she wanted to cry with relief. Excellent. You'd start Monday. I'll email you onboarding paperwork this afternoon. Welcome to Hale Development Group, Miss Thompson. Riley started the job the following week, and within her first month, she understood why Adrian's company was so successful. The work culture was professional but not cutthroat. Employees were treated well, and expectations were high but achievable. Her role involved coordinating projects across departments, managing data for multiple properties, and occasionally preparing reports for executive review. It was challenging work that used her skills and pushed her to grow. And Riley loved it. For the first time in years, she felt like she was building something real rather than just surviving day to day. What she didn't expect was how much her presence in the office would intersect with Adrian's. They worked on different floors. She was with general operations. He was in the executive suite, but their paths crossed regularly. Meetings where she'd present data, and he'd ask insightful questions. Chance encounters in elevators or the break room where they'd chat briefly about Nova or work or nothing in particular, and Riley found herself developing feelings that went far beyond gratitude. She tried to suppress them. Adrian was her boss, technically, even though they didn't work directly together. He was also the man who'd provided her apartment and facilitated her job. Accepting help from him didn't entitle her to anything more, and developing romantic feelings felt like crossing a line that would make everything complicated. But suppressing feelings didn't make them disappear. Riley found herself thinking about Adrian constantly, his quiet strength, his thoughtful kindness, the way he listened when she talked, how he'd let her sleep on his shoulder for 3 hours without complaint, how he'd helped her rebuild her life without expectations or demands. 6 months after that flight, Riley had been promoted to Senior Administrative Coordinator with a raise to $58,000. She'd paid her first month's rent at the apartment. Adrian had extended the rent-free period to 6 months, claiming the building's budget could absorb it easily. Nova was thriving in the building daycare, speaking in full sentences and developing a personality that was equal parts stubborn and sweet. Life was good, better than Riley had imagined possible during those desperate days traveling to Atlanta with nothing but 2 suitcases and a crying baby. But something was missing, and Riley realized with uncomfortable clarity that what was missing was Adrian not as a benefactor or employer, but as something more. The moment she couldn't deny her feelings anymore came at the company's annual holiday party. The event was held at an upscale hotel, with employees encouraged to bring dates or spouses. Riley had attended alone, wearing a dress she'd bought specifically for the occasion, an expense she could now afford, thanks to stable employment. She'd been standing by the bar nursing a glass of wine when Adrian had appeared beside her, looking devastating in a perfectly tailored suit. "You look beautiful," he'd said simply, and the sincerity in his voice had made Riley's breath catch. "Thank you," she'd managed. "You clean up pretty well yourself." They'd talked for an hour, standing at that bar while the party swirled around them, about work and Nova and Atlanta and nothing important but everything important simultaneously. And Riley had realized Adrian was looking at her the way people look at someone they want, not just as an employee or someone they'd helped, but as a woman they found attractive and compelling. "Riley," Adrian had finally said, his voice quiet in the noisy room, "I need to tell you something, and it might make things awkward between us, but I can't keep it to myself anymore." "Okay," Riley had breathed, her heart pounding. "I have feelings for you," Adrian had admitted. "Romantic feelings. They've been developing since that night on the plane when you fell asleep on my shoulder. I've tried to keep things professional, tried not to let my personal feelings affect how I help you or how we work together. But Riley, I can't stop thinking about you, about us, about whether there could be something between us beyond just employer and employee or benefactor and recipient." "Adrian," Riley had whispered, tears forming, "I have feelings for you too. I've been trying to suppress them because I thought they were inappropriate. You've done so much for me. How could I have feelings for you without it seeming like gratitude or obligation, or me trying to secure continued support?" "Is it just gratitude?" Adrian had asked directly. "Because, Riley, I need to know. Are these feelings about me as a person or about what I've provided for you?" Riley had thought carefully about her answer. "Both," she'd admitted honestly. "I'm grateful for everything you've done. But Adrian, I'm attracted to who you are beyond your resources. You're kind and thoughtful, and you actually listen when people talk. You let a stranger sleep on your shoulder for 3 hours. You help me rebuild my life without expectations. You're an incredible man, and yes, I have feelings for you that have nothing to do with apartments or jobs." "Then can I take you to dinner?" Adrian had asked. "A real date, not a business meeting or check-in. Just you and me, exploring whether these feelings could become something real." "Yes," Riley had said, smiling through tears. "I'd love that." Their first official date happened 2 weeks later, dinner at a nice restaurant, followed by a walk through Piedmont Park, despite the December cold. They'd talked for hours about everything: Adrian's lonely childhood as an only child of workaholic parents, Riley's complicated relationship with her mother, who'd disowned her, their hopes and fears and dreams. "I've never told anyone this," Adrian had confessed as they'd walked. "But sometimes I think my entire empire is just an elaborate distraction from being alone. I built something impressive, but I didn't build it with anyone. There's no one to share the success with. Until you. I didn't realize how much that absence mattered." "You're not alone anymore," Riley had said, taking his hand. "If you want me in your life, not just as an employee but as a partner, I'm here." "I want that more than anything," Adrian had replied. Then he'd kissed her, soft and sweet in the cold December night, and Riley had felt something click into place in her chest. 1 year after that flight, Adrian and Riley were officially together, navigating the complications of workplace romance with HR oversight, building their relationship carefully while ensuring their professional roles remained separate, slowly introducing the idea of Adrian's presence in Nova's life. "Da," Nova had started calling Adrian after he'd been part of their lives for several months, unable to pronounce Adrian, but recognizing him as someone important and present. The first time she'd called him that, Adrian had actually teared up. "I'm not trying to replace her father," Adrian had said to Riley that evening. "I know she has a biological dad, even if he's absent. But if she wants to call me that, if she sees me as a father figure, I'm honored by it." "You're more of a father to her than he ever was or will be," Riley had said firmly. "And Adrian, if you want to be her dad in every way that matters, I support that completely." 18 months after the flight, Adrian proposed, not with some elaborate public display, but in their apartment, the same apartment where he'd first offered help, where Riley had rebuilt her life, where they'd slowly fallen in love over countless shared moments. "Riley Thompson," Adrian had said, kneeling in their living room while Nova played with blocks nearby. "That night on the plane when you fell asleep on my shoulder, something shifted in me. You reminded me what authentic human connection feels like. You trusted me when you had no reason to. You accepted help without expectation. You've built an incredible life while raising an amazing daughter, and somehow, you've let me be part of that life. Will you marry me? Will you and Nova officially become my family?" "Yes," Riley had said through happy tears. "Absolutely yes." They married 6 months later in a simple ceremony attended by Aunt Denise, colleagues from work, friends Riley had made in Atlanta, and several of Adrian's business associates who'd become genuine friends. Nova served as flower girl, proudly declaring to everyone that "Da is marrying Mama," with 3-year-old enthusiasm. In his vows, Adrian said, "Riley, I built an empire, but I didn't understand what success actually meant until I met you. Success isn't money or properties or business achievements. It's coming home to people who matter. It's being part of something beyond just yourself. It's having someone trust you enough to fall asleep on your shoulder on a late-night flight. You and Nova gave me a family when I didn't even know how much I needed one. Thank you for letting me be part of your lives. Thank you for choosing me." In her vows, Riley said, "Adrian, when I boarded that flight, I was at my lowest point. I'd lost my job, my apartment, my sense of myself as someone capable and strong. I was exhausted and desperate and afraid I was failing my daughter. Then you showed me kindness I didn't expect and didn't feel I deserved. You helped me rebuild my life, not by rescuing me, but by providing resources that let me rescue myself. You saw me when I felt invisible. You believed in me when I'd stopped believing in myself. I love you not because of what you've given me, but because of who you are, a man who uses his power to help rather than dominate, who values authenticity over image, who let a stranger lean on him and somehow made space in his life for that stranger to become his family." Another. 3 years after that flight, they stood together in the doorway of their new home, a beautiful house in a family-friendly Atlanta neighborhood with a yard for Nova to play in and space for the baby Riley was now pregnant with. They'd sold the apartment building. Adrian insisted Riley have half the proceeds since she'd been paying rent for over a year before they'd married, and invested those funds in their future. "Remember when we met?" Riley asked, leaning against Adrian as they watched Nova chase butterflies in the backyard. "Every detail," Adrian confirmed. "You asked if you could sit down," apologized for Nova potentially crying, looked absolutely exhausted. "And you let me sleep on your shoulder for 3 hours, Riley said. "Changed my entire life by showing basic human kindness." "You changed my life too," Adrian countered. "Reminded me what mattered beyond just business success, gave me a family, taught me that the best things in life come from unexpected places, like a crying baby on a late-night flight." "Best flight of my life," Riley said, "even though I was terrified and exhausted and thought my life was falling apart." "Mine too," Adrian agreed, "because it gave me you and Nova. Because it proved that sometimes the most important moments look like ordinary struggles, a single mother trying to soothe her baby, a lonely businessman sitting in an economy seat. Those ordinary moments became everything." 5 years after the flight, Nova was starting kindergarten, and Riley had been promoted to Director of Community Outreach at Hale Development Group, a role that involved creating affordable housing initiatives and tenant support programs across all their properties. She'd discovered she had a talent for advocacy and community building, using her own experiences to inform compassionate policies. "You know what I love about our story?" Riley told Adrian on their 5th wedding anniversary. "It's not about you rescuing me. It's about you seeing me when I needed to be seen, helping me when I needed help, then letting me rebuild my own life with those resources. You didn't save me, Adrian. You gave me tools to save myself. And you gave me purpose beyond just making money," Adrian replied. "You and Nova reminded me why wealth matters not for accumulation, but for what it lets you do for people who need support. Our community programs, the affordable housing initiatives, the tenant support services, those exist because of you, Riley. Because you showed me what genuine need looks like and taught me how to help without creating dependency." 10 years after that flight, a full decade since Riley had desperately asked a stranger if she could sit beside him, they stood together at Nova's elementary school talent show, watching their daughter perform with confidence and joy. Their son, Adrian Jr., was 4 now, equally bold and sweet, and Riley was 7 months pregnant with their 3rd child, a girl they'd already named Hope. "Can you believe this is our life?" Riley whispered to Adrian as they watched Nova sing. 10 years ago, I was unemployed and homeless, traveling to my aunt's house with nothing but 2 suitcases and a crying baby. Now I'm watching our daughter perform, planning for our 3rd child, doing work I love, married to a man who sees me completely. "Best decision I ever made," Adrian said, was asking that flight attendant for warm water, because that simple act started a conversation that changed everything. "And the best decision I made," Riley added, "was accepting help when my pride wanted me to refuse it, was trusting that kindness could be genuine, was letting myself fall asleep on a stranger's shoulder when exhaustion overcame fear." They stood together, watching their daughter shine, surrounded by the family they'd built from the most unlikely beginnings, a late-night flight, a crying baby, and 2 lonely people who'd chosen connection when distance would have been easier. Sometimes salvation came from unexpected places. Sometimes a single act of compassion rippled outward, transforming lives in ways no one could predict. And sometimes falling asleep on a stranger's shoulder was the first step toward falling in love with your entire future. 15 years after that flight, a full decade and a half since Riley had desperately boarded a plane with her crying baby and nothing but exhaustion and hope, she stood at the opening ceremony of the Riley Thompson Community Center, a facility she'd fought for and funded through her foundation work with Hale Development Group. The center provided job training, childcare resources, and temporary housing assistance for single parents facing circumstances similar to what she'd experienced. "This center exists because I know what it feels like to be at the end of your rope," Riley told the assembled crowd of donors, community leaders, and families who'd already benefited from the programs. 15 years ago, I lost my job, lost my apartment, traveled to Atlanta with my infant daughter and $73 to my name. I was terrified, exhausted, and convinced I'd failed at everything that mattered. She paused, finding Adrian in the crowd, still handsome at 50, graying at the temples but as present and supportive as he'd been on that first flight. Then a stranger on a plane showed me kindness I didn't expect and didn't think I deserved. He let me sleep on his shoulder. He made sure my baby and I had food. And when we landed, he offered help that transformed our entire lives, not by rescuing me, but by providing resources that let me rebuild my own life with dignity. That stranger became my husband, Riley continued, smiling at Adrian. But more importantly, he taught me that people with resources have a responsibility to use them compassionately. That helping others isn't about creating dependency, but about providing the tools people need to help themselves. This center embodies that philosophy. We're not rescuing anyone, we're offering temporary support, skill development, and community connection that lets people rescue themselves. The crowd applauded, and after the ceremony, Riley was surrounded by people sharing their own stories of struggle and resilience. Single mothers who reminded her painfully of who she'd been 15 years ago. Fathers raising children alone. People who'd lost jobs or homes or hope and were fighting to rebuild. "Your story gives me hope," one young woman told Riley, holding a baby who looked about the same age Nova had been on that flight. "I'm exactly where you were lost my job last month, staying with family. Terrified I'm failing my son. But hearing that you made it through, that you built something meaningful from that low point, it helps." "You'll make it through too," Riley assured her. "Accept help when it's offered. Don't let pride keep you from opportunities. And remember that circumstances don't define worth. You're valuable, regardless of your current situation." That evening, back at their home, Riley and Adrian sat on their back porch watching the sunset. Their children were inside. Nova was 23 now, working in urban planning and passionate about affordable housing policy. Adrian Jr. was 19 and in college studying social work. Hope was 15 and already volunteering at the community center, wanting to follow in her mother's footsteps. "I've been thinking about that flight," Riley said, leaning against Adrian. "About how that one night changed absolutely everything. If you hadn't let me sit beside you, if you hadn't helped with Nova's bottle, if I hadn't fallen asleep on your shoulder, our entire lives would be different." "You would have survived without me," Adrian said. "You're strong, Riley. You would have found a way." "Maybe," Riley acknowledged. "But not like this. Not with this stability and joy and purpose. Adrian, you gave me more than an apartment or a job. You gave me the belief that I deserved good things. That accepting help wasn't weakness. That people could be kind without ulterior motives. Those lessons transformed how I saw myself and what I thought was possible. And you gave me family," Adrian countered. "Purpose beyond just business success. You taught me that wealth matters most when it's used to help others. That the best legacy isn't buildings or money, but the lives you've touched and the people you've helped. Riley, without you and Nova, I'd still be that lonely businessman sitting in an economy seat, successful but empty." 20 years after that flight, 2 full decades since a desperate single mother had asked a wealthy stranger if she could sit beside him, Riley and Adrian celebrated their anniversary by recreating that original journey. They boarded a late-night flight from Chicago to Atlanta, deliberately booking seats in the last row of economy class, despite Adrian's wealth that could have easily afforded first class. "This feels surreal," Riley said as they settled into seats 32D and 32E. "Sitting here where it all started. But this time I'm not desperate, and you're not a stranger." "Should I call for warm water?" Adrian teased. "Recreate the whole experience?" "Only if I get to fall asleep on your shoulder again," Riley replied with a smile. As the plane took off, Riley rested her head against Adrian's shoulder, deliberately this time, consciously, full of love rather than exhaustion. They sat in comfortable silence, both reflecting on the extraordinary journey their lives had taken from this exact position 20 years ago. "What would you tell that version of me?" Riley asked quietly. The exhausted single mother who was terrified she'd failed at everything. What would you want her to know about what was coming? Adrian thought carefully. "I'd tell her that she's stronger than she knows, that the man sitting beside her is about to help change her life, but she's the one who'll do the actual work of transformation. That 20 years later, she'll be running a foundation, raising 3 incredible children, married to someone who loves her completely, and using her experiences to help hundreds of families facing similar struggles. I'd tell her that this terrible moment is actually the beginning of something extraordinary." "And what would you tell the lonely businessman?" Riley asked. "The man who'd built an empire but didn't have anyone to share it with." "I'd tell him that the woman who's about to fall asleep on his shoulder is going to teach him what success actually means," Adrian said. "That letting her sleep for 3 hours will be the beginning of the most meaningful relationship of his life. That helping her isn't charity, it's recognizing a kindred spirit who's facing challenges he has resources to address. I'd tell him to be patient, to help without expectation, and to trust that something real and beautiful can grow from this unlikely beginning." When they landed in Atlanta, their adult children were waiting at the airport, Nova with her fiancé, Adrian Jr. with his girlfriend, Hope with her typical teenage energy. The family had planned a celebration dinner to commemorate the 20th anniversary of the flight that started everything, as they all called it. "Tell us the story again," Hope demanded as they drove to the restaurant. "About how you met," I know I've heard it a million times, but I want to hear it again." So Riley and Adrian told the story one more time: the crying baby, the exhausted mother, the kind stranger, the shoulder to sleep on, the warm water and food and toy, the apartment offer that had seemed too good to be true, the job that had rebuilt Riley's life, the feelings that had developed gradually until neither could deny them anymore. "The thing I want you all to understand," Riley told her children, "is that this story isn't just about romance. It's about the importance of helping people when they need it, about accepting help when it's offered, about recognizing that we're all interconnected, and sometimes the person sitting next to you needs exactly what you have to offer. And it's about seeing people clearly," Adrian added. "Your mother could have been anyone to me, just another passenger on a plane. But I actually looked at her, saw her exhaustion and struggle, recognized her humanity. That simple act of seeing led to everything that followed." 25 years after that flight, Riley published a memoir titled "Falling Asleep: How One Flight Changed Everything." The book became a bestseller, resonating with millions of readers who saw their own struggles reflected in Riley's story. She appeared on talk shows, gave keynote addresses, became a spokesperson for single parents facing economic hardship. But what mattered most to Riley wasn't the fame or recognition. It was the letters she received from readers, hundreds, then thousands of them, sharing their own stories of struggle and resilience, asking for advice, thanking her for being honest about how hard single parenting could be and how accepting help wasn't failure. "Your story saved me," one letter read. "I was too proud to accept help from my family when I lost my job. I thought I had to handle everything alone. But reading about how you let Adrian help you, how that help wasn't weakness but wisdom, it gave me permission to ask for support. I moved in with my sister, accepted help with childcare, took the time to find a good job rather than just any job. I'm stable now because you showed me that accepting help was okay." Those letters filled a wall in Riley's office, physical proof that sharing her story created ripples extending far beyond her own life, helping people she'd never meet make better choices during their own difficult times. 30 years after that flight, Riley and Adrian renewed their vows in a ceremony attended by their children, grandchildren. Nova had 2 daughters now, extended family, and hundreds of people whose lives had been touched by the community center and foundation work. They stood together, older but still deeply in love, recommitting to partnership and family, and using their resources to help others. 30 years ago, Adrian said in his renewed vows, "A young woman asked if she could sit beside me on a plane. I said yes, and that simple acceptance changed my entire life. Riley, you've been teaching me for 3 decades what actually matters, not money or business success, but family and community, and using what you have to help others. You've made me a better person. You've given me children and grandchildren I adore. You've shown me that the best legacy isn't what you build, but who you help and how you love. Thank you for falling asleep on my shoulder 30 years ago. Thank you for trusting me enough to accept help. Thank you for building this extraordinary life with me." "Adrian," Riley said in her renewed vows, "when I boarded that flight 30 years ago, I thought my life was over. I'd lost everything that defined me, my job, my home, my sense of competence. I was exhausted and scared and convinced I was failing the one person who mattered most, my daughter. Then you showed me kindness I didn't expect. You helped without asking for anything in return. You saw me when I felt invisible. You believed in me when I'd stopped believing in myself. But what you gave me wasn't just material help," Riley continued. "You gave me the understanding that I deserved good things, that circumstances don't define worth. That accepting support isn't weakness but wisdom. Those lessons transformed not just my life but how I see my responsibility to others. Because of you, I've spent decades helping people facing struggles I understand intimately. Because of you, I learned that people with resources should use them compassionately. Because of you, I found love I didn't think was possible after years of loneliness. Adrian, thank you for letting me fall asleep on your shoulder. Thank you for changing my life. Thank you for 30 years of partnership and love." They kissed while their family and friends cheered, both understanding that this wasn't just about their marriage, but about everything their relationship represented, the power of compassion, the importance of helping others, the reality that sometimes the most important moments look ordinary until you understand their full significance. 35 years after that flight, Riley and Adrian sat together in the same seats, 32D and 32E, on another late-night flight from Chicago to Atlanta. They'd made this commemorative journey every 5 years since their 20th anniversary, each time reflecting on how much had changed and how grateful they were for that original meeting. This time, they were older. Adrian was 70 now, Riley 61. Their children were middle-aged with children of their own. The foundation work had expanded to multiple cities. The community center served thousands of families annually. Their memoir continued selling steadily, helping new generations understand that accepting help during difficult times wasn't weakness. "Do you remember what you were thinking?" Riley asked as the plane took off. "That first night, when I fell asleep on your shoulder. What actually went through your mind?" "I remember thinking that no one had ever trusted me like that," Adrian admitted, completely unconsciously, with no awareness of who I was or what I could provide. "You were just exhausted and I'd offered a shoulder and you accepted. That trust, that simple, uncomplicated trust, it broke something open in me. Made me realize how lonely I'd been, how much I'd isolated myself behind wealth and professional success. I was so embarrassed when I woke up," Riley remembered, mortified that I'd fallen asleep on a stranger. "But you'd covered us with a blanket and gotten food and given Nova a toy. You'd taken care of us while I slept. I'd never experienced that before, someone caring for me without expecting anything in return, without making me feel like a burden." "You were never a burden," Adrian said firmly. "You were someone who needed help, and I had resources to provide it. That's not burden, that's basic human responsibility to each other." As the plane landed in Atlanta for what would be their final commemorative journey, they'd agreed 35 years was a good final marker. Their entire family was waiting at the airport. Not just immediate family, but extended community people Riley had helped through the foundation. Families who'd utilized the community center, individuals whose lives had been changed by reading her memoir and implementing its lessons. The airport had arranged for a small ceremony recognizing Riley and Adrian's community contributions. The mayor gave a speech about their foundation's impact. Several families shared testimonials about how the community center had helped them during difficult times. And Nova, now a city councilwoman focused on affordable housing policy, presented her parents with a proclamation declaring this date Compassion in Action Day in honor of their 35 years of using resources to help others. "My parents' story began with one simple act of kindness," Nova told the assembled crowd. "A stranger letting an exhausted mother rest on his shoulder during a flight. That small moment of compassion rippled outward, transforming not just my mother's life and my childhood, but thousands of lives through the work they've done together. They taught all of us that we have responsibility to help each other, that circumstances don't define worth, that the best use of resources is lifting others up." That evening, the entire family gathered at Riley and Adrian's home for dinner, 3 generations around a table, sharing food and laughter and love. Riley looked around at her children and grandchildren, at the life she'd built from that desperate low point 35 years ago, and felt overwhelming gratitude. "I want to tell you all something," Riley said during dessert. "When I boarded that flight 35 years ago, I thought my life was ending. I'd lost my job, my apartment, everything I'd worked for. I was terrified I was failing my daughter, failing at being an adult, failing at everything that mattered. I couldn't imagine a future that wasn't just survival and struggle." She paused, emotion thick in her voice. "But that flight, that terrible, exhausting flight where Nova cried, and I felt so judged and alone, that was actually the beginning of everything good in my life. Because a stranger chose kindness, because I chose to accept help despite my pride, because we both chose to see each other as whole humans rather than just passenger and seat companion. The lesson I want you all to take from this," Riley continued, "is that sometimes your worst moments are actually doorways to your best future, that accepting help isn't weakness, it's wisdom. That showing compassion costs little but can change everything, and that we're all interconnected in ways we don't always recognize. The person sitting next to you on a plane or standing beside you in line or working in your office, they might need exactly what you have to offer, or they might have exactly what you need. We're meant to help each other. My parents taught me that wealth isn't about accumulation, Nova added. It's about circulation, about taking what you have, whether that's money or time or skills or just a shoulder to rest on, and sharing it with people who need it. That circulation creates community, creates connection, creates the kind of life worth living. Adrian, quieter as he'd aged but still deeply present, spoke last. 35 years ago, I was successful but lonely. I'd built an empire, but I hadn't built a life. Then Riley fell asleep on my shoulder and reminded me what actually mattered. She gave me a family, gave me purpose beyond just business, showed me that the best investments aren't financial, they're human. I'm grateful every single day that I said yes when she asked to sit beside me, that I offered help when I saw she needed it, that I had the courage to pursue something real with someone I could have easily dismissed as just another passenger. 40 years after that flight, 4 full decades since a desperate single mother had boarded a plane with her crying baby, Riley passed away peacefully in her sleep at age 66, surrounded by family. She'd lived to see her foundation expand nationally, had helped thousands of families rebuild their lives, had written 3 books about resilience and compassion, had been grandmother to 8 and great-grandmother to 2. At her funeral, the church was packed with people whose lives she'd touched: family, friends, foundation beneficiaries, readers of her memoir, community members. The eulogies shared countless stories of Riley's compassion, her fierce advocacy for struggling families, her refusal to let circumstances define anyone's worth. But it was Adrian's eulogy that captured the essence of who Riley had been and what their relationship had meant. Standing at the podium at 75, his voice steady despite obvious grief, he told their story one final time. 40 years ago, a young woman asked if she could sit beside me on a plane. She was exhausted, desperate, afraid she was failing at everything that mattered. I was lonely, successful, surrounded by people, but genuinely connected to almost no one. We were both exactly what the other needed, though neither of us knew it yet. Riley fell asleep on my shoulder that night, Adrian continued. That simple act of unconscious trust changed my entire life. She reminded me what authentic human connection felt like. She showed me that wealth matters most when it's used to help others. She taught me that the best legacy isn't buildings or money, but the lives you've touched and the love you've shared. We had 40 years together, Adrian said, tears flowing now. 40 years of partnership and family and using our resources to help others. 40 years of Riley pushing me to be more compassionate, more generous, more focused on what actually matters. She was the love of my life, the mother of my children, my partner in everything meaningful. And it all started because I let her sleep on my shoulder during a late-night flight. Riley believed that we're all interconnected, Adrian concluded. That helping each other isn't optional, it's fundamental to being human. She lived that belief every single day for 40 years. And the ripple effects of her life, the families she helped, the people she inspired, the love she shared, those ripples will continue spreading long after we've all passed. That's her legacy. That's what that exhausted single mother, who asked to sit beside me 40 years ago, ultimately created: a movement of compassion that will outlive us all. Adrian lived 5 more years after Riley's death, spending that time ensuring the foundation continued, with Riley's values guiding every decision. He established endowments, ensuring permanent funding for the community center and programs. He wrote his own memoir, focusing on what Riley had taught him about using wealth compassionately. And he visited their seats 32D and 32E on late-night flights from Chicago to Atlanta, one final time before his own death at 80. Nova, continuing her parents' work through both political advocacy and foundation leadership, often told their story to illustrate why policy matters, why community support makes a difference, why treating people with dignity regardless of their circumstances creates better outcomes for everyone. My parents' story isn't unique in its components, Nova would say. People face hardship all the time. People show kindness regularly. What made their story special was what they built from that initial moment of compassion, a relationship based on mutual respect, a family created from unlikely circumstances, a foundation helping thousands, a legacy proving that we're meant to help each other. 50 years after that flight, Riley and Adrian's great-grandchildren heard the story of how their great-grandparents met. The tale had become family legend, passed down through generations, embellished with each retelling but fundamentally unchanged. A desperate single mother, a lonely millionaire, a crying baby, a shoulder to rest on, and a lifetime of love and purpose built from that single moment of compassion. "What's the lesson?" one great-grandchild asked after hearing the story. "What are we supposed to learn from all this?" "That circumstances don't define worth," Nova answered, now elderly herself but still fierce in her advocacy. "That accepting help when you need it is wisdom, not weakness. That showing compassion costs little but can change everything. That we're all interconnected. The person beside you might need exactly what you have to offer or might have exactly what you need. And most importantly, that sometimes the ordinary moments are actually the most significant." A question: "Can I sit here?" An answer: "Go ahead and rest." From those simple words, entire lives can transform. The story of Riley and Adrian became more than just family history. It was taught in social work programs as an example of compassionate intervention, featured in business schools, illustrating socially responsible wealth management, shared in parenting groups helping single mothers understand that accepting support wasn't failure, referenced in sermons and speeches about human interconnection and community responsibility. Because their story proved something important, that compassion changes everything. That one act of kindness, letting someone rest on your shoulder, offering help without expectation, seeing someone's humanity when they feel invisible, can ripple outward in ways no one can predict, transforming not just 2 lives but thousands. 50 years after a young black single mother had fallen asleep on a millionaire's shoulder during a late-night flight, their descendants gathered at the community center, bearing Riley's name, sharing the story one more time with new generations who needed to understand its lessons. "It started with exhaustion and desperation," the storyteller said. "A crying baby, a stranger's kindness, a shoulder to sleep on. It became a love story. But more than that, it became a blueprint for how we should treat each other with compassion, with generosity, with the understanding that helping others isn't charity, but basic human responsibility. And it reminds us," the storyteller concluded, "that sometimes the moment when everything feels like it's falling apart is actually the moment right before everything begins falling into place. That the worst nights can become the doorway to the best future. That trusting enough to fall asleep on a stranger's shoulder might be the first step toward falling in love with an entire lifetime of possibility." The audience sat in silence for a moment, absorbing the story's truth. Then someone in the back stood and began clapping, and soon the entire room was applauding not just for Riley and Adrian's story, but for what it represented: the power of compassion, the importance of helping each other, the reality that we're all connected in ways we don't always recognize until someone falls asleep on our shoulder and changes everything.